The Last Train to Nowhere, Episode 1. Mia leaned against the cold metal railing of the platform, her arms crossed tightly around herself. The late-night chill crept through her jacket, but it was more than the cold that made her uncomfortable. She had chosen this train deliberately. The last one, far past rush hour when the platform was nearly deserted. She wanted the anonymity, the silence. Above her, the dim station lights flickered, casting long shadows over the tracks. In the distance, the low rumble of the train echoed through the empty station. It was just as she'd hoped. No one else seemed to be waiting. As the train pulled in, the screech of its brakes sent a shiver down her spine. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the blackened windows, unsure if anyone else was aboard. It didn't matter. She needed to get away, needed to escape the suffocating grasp of her past. With a deep breath, Mia stepped onto the train. Inside, the carriage was dimly lit, the seats mostly empty. There were a few other passengers scattered about, each lost in their own world. She noticed a man in a suit sitting stiffly near the front, his fingers tapping incessantly against the armrest. Across from him, an older woman clutched a small locket, staring out the window with hollow eyes. A teenage girl in a hoodie sat further back, her gaze distant, lost in the glow of her phone. No one seemed interested in acknowledging one another. Mia chose a seat by the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass as the train lurched forward. The city lights blurred past in streaks of orange and yellow, and soon the urban sprawl gave way to darkness, the train slipping into the unknown. She closed her eyes, willing herself to relax, to forget what she had left behind. But something about the motion of the train felt wrong. It was subtle at first, just a vague unease, but it began to grow. The rhythmic clattering of the wheels was too steady, too monotonous, like a heartbeat stuck in an endless loop. Mia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing around. The other passengers hadn't moved. The man in the suit continued his tapping, the older woman still gazed blankly into the night, and the girl hadn't lifted her eyes from her phone. The train sped on, yet it felt as if they were going nowhere. Mia checked the time on her phone. She frowned. They should have reached the first stop by now. She waited, listening, expecting the overhead announcement for the next station. Nothing. The minutes ticked by, but the train didn't slow. She glanced around again, her unease growing into something sharper, more urgent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a garbled announcement crackled through the speakers. The words were unintelligible, a distorted jumble of sounds. Mia strained to listen, but it was no use. The announcement ended abruptly, leaving only a hollow static in its wake. She glanced out the window again. Nothing but darkness. Mia's fingers tapped against the seat beside her, mirroring the anxious man at the front of the train. Her heartbeat quickened, her throat tightening. The night outside the window seemed endless now. There were no streetlights, no signs of life, just an impenetrable black void that stretched on as far as she could see. She tried to focus on her breathing, but every passing moment only heightened the tension curling in her chest. She wasn't the only one who noticed something was wrong. The older woman with the locket had shifted, her brow furrowed as she looked around the carriage for the first time. Her lips moved, murmuring something under her breath. Further down, the teenage girl raised her head, pulling her earbuds out, her face a mask of confusion. Mia bit her lip. It wasn't just her. Everyone could feel it now. This train had been moving far too long without stopping. She reached for her phone again, but the screen was blank. No signal, no data. A cold sweat broke across her skin as she stared at the screen, willing it to connect, to tell her something, anything. Still nothing. The digital clock on her phone seemed frozen, unmoving. The man in the suit stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His agitation was palpable as he marched toward the front of the carriage, heading for the conductor's booth. Mia watched him, her muscles tensing involuntarily. She wanted to follow him, to ask what was going on, but her legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. The man knocked on the door to the conductor's booth. There was no response. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. After a moment, he pounded his fist against the door, his voice rising in frustration. "What the hell is going on? Open up!" The door remained shut, the only answer a soft creaking as the train swayed slightly on the tracks. The man's fists curled at his sides. His voice cracked with a desperate edge. "Open the damn door!" Mia could see the tension rippling through the other passengers now. The older woman clutched her locket tighter, whispering something beneath her breath. The girl in the hoodie glanced around, her expression mirroring the same growing dread that Mia felt. None of them spoke, but it was clear they were all thinking the same thing. Where were they? The train's steady rhythm continued, but the world outside the windows had turned into a featureless black void. No landmarks, no lights, no sign of life. Mia's breath caught in her throat. They should have stopped by now. They should have seen something. But there was only the dark. Suddenly, the train lurched, and the overhead lights flickered. Mia's heart skipped a beat as the carriage plunged into brief darkness before the lights returned, weaker than before. She gripped the armrest, her pulse racing. Something was very wrong. The train began to slow. The other passengers sat up straighter, eyes darting to the windows. At first, all Mia could see was more of the endless black void, but then slowly, an outline appeared in the distance. A structure emerging from the shadows, a station. Mia squinted, trying to make out any details as the train coasted into the platform. The fog outside was thick, swirling like smoke under the dim lights. There was no station name, no signs indicating where they had arrived. Just an empty platform, draped in mist. The man in the suit was the first to move. He marched toward the doors as soon as the train stopped, yanking them open. Mia hesitated, glancing back at the others. The older woman was staring, wide-eyed, at the fog, her lips trembling. The teenage girl was slowly rising from her seat, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. No one seemed to know what to do. The man stepped off the train, disappearing into the mist. Mia swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand. Her legs felt shaky beneath her, but the thought of staying on the train, of letting it keep moving into this unknown darkness, was worse. One by one, the passengers disembarked. Stepping onto the cold platform, Mia's boots echoed softly against the concrete as she followed them into the fog. The air was heavy, damp, and unsettlingly quiet. No sound, no movement, just the dense fog swirling around them. The train doors slid shut behind them with a hiss. Mia spun around in time to see the train begin to move again, pulling away from the platform, disappearing into the mist. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Wait!" she called out, taking a few steps after it. But the train was already gone. They were stranded. A thick, oppressive silence settled over the platform as the train disappeared from sight. Mia stood frozen, staring into the direction where it had vanished. The fog was impenetrable now, curling around them like a shroud. There were no signs of life, no ticket booths, no passengers, no staff, just the mist and the stillness. The man in the suit who had taken charge earlier paced back and forth, his agitation returning. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, glancing around as if hoping the station would suddenly explain itself. "What kind of place is this?" Mia glanced at the other passengers. The older woman was clutching her locket to her chest, her eyes filled with a quiet, almost resigned fear. The teenage girl hovered near the platform's edge, her phone held up high, but it was useless. She shook her head, frustration etched into her features as she looked back at Mia, mouthing something that Mia couldn't hear. The fog swallowed everything around them, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Mia's pulse raced as she scanned their surroundings, trying to make sense of where they were. There was no sign of the city, no buildings, no familiar landmarks, just the empty station and the endless mist. The man in the suit suddenly cursed under his breath and stormed toward what looked like an exit sign at the far end of the platform. "I'm not standing around waiting for nothing," he snapped, his voice tight with panic. "I'm going to find someone, anyone." Mia hesitated, torn between following him and staying put. Something about this place felt off, wrong in a way she couldn't quite describe. The air felt heavy, almost stifling, like they were trapped in a space that didn't belong to them. The man reached the exit, but just as he was about to push through the rusted door, he froze. His hand hovered over the handle, trembling slightly. He stepped back, confusion flickering across his face. What is this?" Mia took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The fog seemed to ripple, distorting the air around the door. For a split second, she thought she saw something, a shadow moving in the mist just beyond the door, something that shouldn't be there. The man in the suit stepped back from the door, his face pale. "There's something there." His voice trembled as he pointed toward the fog beyond the exit. Mia squinted, trying to see through the thick haze, but all she could make out were shifting shadows, swirling like smoke. "Don't be ridiculous," the older woman said, her voice shaky as she approached. Her eyes darted to the fog, but she too hesitated, her hand gripping the locket tightly. "It's just the mist playing tricks on us. There's no one out there." But Mia could feel it, a presence, watching, waiting. Her breath hitched as she turned slowly, scanning the platform again. The silence pressed in on her ears, and the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. There was no movement, no sound, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The teenage girl took a step back from the group. Her phone held out in front of her as if it could protect her. She looked over at Mia, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear that?" Mia's heart pounded as she strained to listen. At first, there was nothing, just the heavy stillness of the fog. But then, faintly, almost too quiet to notice, she heard it. A rhythmic tapping. It was distant, coming from somewhere deep within the mist. It was slow, methodical, like the sound of footsteps, or something tapping its fingers. The man in the suit cursed again, shaking his head. "This is insane," he muttered, stepping away from the door. "We need to find a way out of here." But the tapping grew louder, closer. Mia's pulse quickened as she turned toward the source of the sound, her eyes wide with fear. The fog parted slightly, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of something, someone standing in the distance. It was a figure, barely visible through the mist. It didn't move. It simply stood there, still and silent, watching them. Mia's breath caught in her throat as her mind raced. Who was it? Where had they come from? Before she could say anything, the older woman gasped, taking a step back. It's them," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "The faceless ones." Mia's blood ran cold. The faceless ones? Her heart pounded in her chest as she squinted through the fog, trying to make out the figure. It stood impossibly still, its outline just barely visible in the shifting mist. She could feel the others' fear radiating off them in waves, but no one moved. No one dared to. The tapping stopped. Silence fell once more, the kind that suffocated and left no room for comfort. Who are they?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. The older woman shook her head, her hands trembling as she clutched the locket tighter. "I've heard stories, old, forgotten tales. They say they come for those who are lost, for those who don't belong." Mia's stomach twisted in knots. She glanced at the others. The man in the suit looked pale, his bravado crumbling, while the teenage girl stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. Mia's own breath came in shallow gasps, her pulse hammering in her ears. Suddenly, the figure moved. A slow, deliberate step forward. Mia's breath hitched as she took a step back. What do they want? The fog swirled around the figure as it took another step closer, its form becoming clearer. And then she saw it. The face, or rather, the lack of one. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was only smooth, featureless skin. A wave of nausea washed over her as her legs trembled beneath her. The figure took another step, then another. It was coming toward them, slow but relentless. The older woman gasped again, her voice breaking. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. The figure was almost upon them, its faceless head tilting slightly as if observing them, deciding. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her mind screaming at her to run. But she couldn't move. None of them could. They were frozen, trapped in place as the faceless figure came closer. Closer.
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.